Although I am a typical loner in my daily life, my awareness of belonging to the invisible community of those who strive for truth, beauty, and justice has prevented me from feelings of isolation. Albert Einstein. If you connect with the names Chris Williamson, Stephen Bartlett, Andrew Huberman, Jordan Peterson, Lex Friedman, just to name a few, you're probably cut from a very similar cloth as me. Now, said cloth isn't a very common cloth to see other people around you wearing. This is the cloth of depth. Somebody that views life more through reality. One who has a thirst for the big questions. They want to better understand themselves and the world around them. They crave that deep intellectual discourse. They like learning new things. They're enthralled with self-betterment. As you go around, you quickly see the majority of people are wearing a different cloth. They're wearing a cloth of keeping up with the Joneses, how's the weather, reality TV, surface level, just kind of grazing the surface of everything, cheap, low-level entertainment. Now, this is very normal, and heck, I even have my moments in stuff like that too. It can be very disheartening and demeaning when a good chunk of your day-to-day, your soul is sort of depressed. You kind of have to nod along, wear the mask, guide on the surface, kind of lowering yourself with everybody else. Before and after these bouts of publicness, whether it's, at work, even just going to a grocery store sometimes can feel like this. You're very with yourself. You're clear, your mind feels right, you're in touch, you're growing, you're learning, you're connecting, maybe around the few people, the family, the people you really love. You feel very clear of what you want. And then you go out and you kind of have to dim things down, turn down your brightness, turn down the true you, handshake, whatever, hello. And then you get home and you sort of take the mask off, have a deep breath, sigh of relief, and then you kind of resume being yourself, being the one of depth, being who you really are. Of course, I wish it wasn't this way. I wish I could go throughout my whole day, be kind of the real me, talk about what I'm interested in, get deep with things, connect with everybody. But, when you possess a certain, quality of mind, you're on a different end of the spectrum than a lot of the average people. There's just less people to relate to. And this is just kind of the price you have to pay. If you're average, you look around and everybody tends to look like you. And oh my God, they're interested in things I'm interested in, video games, cool, yeah. And life's gravy. Think about your Nietzsche's, your Einsteins, your Nikola Teslas, pretty much any philosopher, any writer, any mathematician. They turn to books, and we have podcasts to kind of fill this hole. We share the same symptoms. The prescription may be slightly different, but the medicine has a similar effect. Podcasts for me certainly fill that kind of hole I have, that fiending, that wanting that fix, wanting that connection, wanting those deep, intellectual, stimulating, interesting conversations that on a day-to-day basis, I just don't normally get to have. As Chris Williamson would say, he talks about the lonely chapter. The lonely chapter isn't so lonely anymore. A good podcast is kind of like having a set scheduled coffee date with your best friend. You can bet your bottom dollar every time you sit across from your best friend and you guys are just talking, hanging out, you're going to learn something totally unexpected. You're going to express your emotions, ideas, feelings, thoughts, things you're going through, what's going on in your life, any curiosities you might have. You're going to develop this deep connection. It's kind of the same way with podcasts. That's kind of the similar feeling you get. You can bet your bottom dollar that Chris Williamson is going to upload a podcast Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. And while we may not be on the receiving end actually talking to Chris, it sure feels like we're growing with him, we're relating, we're understanding the storylines. So I'm definitely very thankful. Thank you, Chris. Books are great. You're learning something, you're in a different world per se. But what I really like about the podcast is, you see the facial expressions, you hear the tone in their voice. You develop this connection. There's a little bit more vulnerability in their ideas because it's not so, meticulously thought out in a book. It's kind of half-baked, but kind of thought through, and you're just exchanging words, exchanging vibes. So it's kind of, for me, it's probably like why I make these videos. It's kind of my own mini podcast like this. Now, I don't want this to come across like I or anybody else is above you because, we think we're so superior in our way of thinking. And I don't want anybody to be ostracized out there if they're like, well, geez, I don't really feel that way. I don't really think that way. There's nothing wrong with that. It's probably wise to zoom out because not everybody can be a deep thinker, have that quality of mind. They have work, they have stresses, they have kids, and the last thing they want to do at the end of their day is, maybe reflect, think deeply, listen to a nice intellectual conversation. They just want to scroll on TikTok, turn off their mind. I get it. So deep thinking certainly is a privilege. It comes with, somebody that gets to have a lot of solitude, time on their hands. And I think it also should be brought up that while, somebody kind of in more of that deep thinking mindset really tends to reside in solitude and finds, clarity and peace in it, that we shouldn't totally reside in this solitude and never go outside because small talk and conversations and little sparks like that and connections can eventually turn into deep thinking, deep connection infernos. But you have to get out there first and lay the spark. I'm sure this sounds like such a champagne problem, 21st century problem. Oh, boo-hoo, guy thinks he's misunderstood, nobody gets him, feel sorry for me. But I do think, it is a legitimate thing that people go through. And I gotta say, I'm thankful for podcasts, books, these outside sources of dialect, information, conversation, stimuli, because a good chunk of my day-to-day, and I'm sure a lot of other people out there, you don't get that same feeling, just kind of due to the state of your mind. So find your tribe, find your community, keep watching those podcasts, because you truly aren't alone.